Welcome to a Modern Nonprofit podcast, powered by the Charity CFO, your compass for creative solutions in running your nonprofit. I'm Tosha Anderson, your host and guide through this nonprofit maze. From fundraising to volunteer management, we've got your back. Join us each episode for fresh, game-changing strategies that can make a real impact. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. You know me, I'm Tosha Anderson, your host. And today I bring along, I say this every episode, but I mean this, somebody that I know well, Dr. Tiffany Slater. Tiffany, you are an HR guru. You've been working with me for a while now and personally helped me stay out of hot water with my HR stuff. But we also work together with nonprofit organizations over the years and really talked a lot about risks and things that nonprofit leaders should really be paying attention to when it comes to their HR stuff. So before I dive into this conversation, I'm very excited to have because I'm very passionate about the risks here. First, I want to say thank you, Tiffany, for being here. Tiffany, maybe share a little bit more about your firm. I know HR Tailor Made is a firm that works with nonprofit organizations and other small businesses in the HR space. So you do a little bit of everything, right? For a lot of the clients you work with.
We do, yeah. I mean, obviously there are a couple exceptions to the rule, but we support organizations like the Charity CFO and nonprofit organizations with their human resources needs. Our goal is to, one, help you all to create a culture that is conducive to people experiencing joy in the workplace. That's super important for us, but we've got to start with the policies. We've got to start with the basics. So those are the things that we specialize in. And then, of course, we provide the maintenance as it relates to human resources for our clients as well.
I'm going to dive into this as a shameless plug for the work that you do, because I think sometimes you hear like talk is cheap. We work with nonprofit organizations in a fractional way. We support them through outsourced accounting, right? And you do that also with HR. And I believe so strongly in hiring the people that have the right expertise for your organization. So full disclosure, I've been working with Tiffany. She's helped me. I do not try to be an HR expert. I do not try to solve all of the HR things on my own. So I believe so strongly in the fact that we need to make sure we have the right people doing the right work with the right expertise to protect the organization that you are in charge of leading. And I know, Tiffany, that's how you and I got connected, because you've worked with me and I could speak to all of the things I've learned through our work together, and hoping to kind of share some of that with with the nonprofit leaders that are listening. And I kind of want to dive into some of the things that when you and I were chatting about doing an episode together, there was a few things that immediately came to my mind that I know, because I've seen it from some of my clients or prospective clients, that I know that they're not doing very well. And I get nervous about this. I'm going to be a little doom and gloom today on this episode, you all, because I get people that reach out to me all the time and they're nervous and anxious about their accounting and the risk of noncompliance and people finding out about it. And I said, look, you all are worried about the accounting, and I don't want to discount that. Yes, I can get us into some hot water, but I think HR is such an afterthought for leaders that they don't have any idea the risky business that they're playing with when not having the right person with the right experience. And so let's just start with, I think, some of the top things, right, that people don't realize can get them in a lot of trouble, that can not just like, oh, I didn't do the things I was supposed to, but financially penalizing ways of being in trouble. Let's talk about misclassifying employees and contractors. Now, talk to us about that, Tiffany. What are you seeing and how are organizations slipping up here?
Well, organizations are slipping up, quite frankly, by classifying people as contractors when they fact by law should be employees. And I think the misconception here is that we can decide whether they are a contractor or an employee when there are requirements that have to be met in order for a person to be classified as a contractor or to be to fit the bill as a contractor. Specifically, there are things that have to be true. And because so many people believe that they can do HR and they can be the HR person,
Hmm.
they don't even know that
Right.
there are places that you have to go to find the information so that you can make the right decisions as it relates to your employees. So that
Hmm.
is a huge one. The law just changed earlier this year as
Hmm.
it relates to classifying people as employees versus contractors. And
Hmm.
it's way more difficult right now to justify a person being a contractor versus being an employee. The
Right.
problem with this is if a person is classified as a contractor and they file a complaint against you saying, hey, I should be an employee, you're going to be on the hook for the
Yep.
back taxes that you should have paid, the back taxes that they should have paid, and there will be a penalty.
Penalties. Hmm.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
mhm,
And you bring up a good point because I think that people think that it's not as cut and dry and imposed by those at the federal level. This is not a we can make the decision internally. This is not by state or local municipality jurisdiction. This is the federal level. And I say, there are two agencies I'm not interested in having come knock on my door. That is the Department of Labor and that's the IRS, right? And these two agencies are pretty savage about this misclassification between contractors and employers. And Tiffany, I've had more than I care to admit that I'm more than I'm comfortable with, especially small grassroots organizations that might have like maybe their first time executive director, they're paying them as a contractor. And I've actually heard, well, someday we hope to have enough money to convert me to salary. The
wow.
inability to pay payroll taxes is not going to fly with the Department of Labor or the IRS. And even if somebody is willing to be listed as a contractor, or maybe they have a desire to be listed as a contractor for whatever their personal tax planning strategies are, does not mean that the IRS or the Department of Labor is going to be okay with that. And so, Tiffany, I've always taken the approach, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm spreading false information, but I tell people it's always more conservative to categorize anyone working with you as an employee. You
True.
basically can't go wrong with calling them an employee, even if they're on the fence, default
Yes.
to employee,
The
which
easiest thing to do, two things: classify a person as an employee and pay them hourly.
pay them hourly.
You
Yes.
won't get in trouble with either one of those. Yeah.
And you bring up a good point. So we're talking about categorization of contractors
Yeah.
versus employees, but
Mhm.
let's switch just to the camp of employees. There is also guidance. Sometimes I don't know how clear it is, but there is guidance
Right.
from the Department of Labor on the difference between exempt versus non-exempt, salary versus hourly. And there's very specific requirements that have to be met in order to pay somebody a salary. And I'm just working with a new organization, has somewhere about 70 employees, shocking number of people that are considered exempt that I'm not an HR person. We know this. I'm a CPA by trade, but I've been around the HR
Mhm.
space long enough to know what those exemption rules are.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that organizations get themselves, I think, tripped up, that you don't get to just decide, I want to simplify my payroll and I'm going to pay them salary.
And the employee does not get to choose it either
Right.
because they don't want to clock in and out. And so here's something that I want to that I want to clarify. There is exempt and non-exempt, and there is salaried and hourly. They are not the
Mm-hmm.
same.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of people think that they are the same. You can have a salaried person. Salaried just means that every pay period you are paid the same amount of money. That's all that
Mm-hmm.
means.
Right.
And hourly means I am punching the clock and I am tracking my hours by, every
Mhm.
hour that I work, I track my breaks. If I work over 40 hours in a week, I get paid overtime. That is what determines whether or not you are non-exempt. That means
Mhm.
non-exempt from um, not having to be paid overtime.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
confusing. But if you are exempt, it means I work 50 hours a week and I am exempt from having overtime paid to me.
Right.
So you can have a person who is salaried who gets paid the same thing every month or every pay period who is also non-exempt.
Mhm.
You can do that. So if that person goes over 40 hours in a week and you need to pay them overtime, then maybe on the next pay period, you make that adjustment to pay them the overtime that they should have been paid. But they're very different. And we use those terms
Interch
inter
yeah,
um,
interchangeably. Yeah. You bring
interchangeably.
up a good point, Tiffany, that I think some people, and I'll be honest, I've been in this camp as well, that I have team members that I want to make sure gets paid a consistent amount. We offer lots of flexibility here, and I didn't want them to have huge swings in their salary. And I paid them a salary. Now they were non-exempt, right, based on their duties and responsibilities. So what that meant is I had to have a system for them to account for their hours, and I had to review it and I had to approve it. And to your point, if there were weeks that they went over their 40 hours, I then had to make whole on the money that I owed them. Now, where that's tricky is I might have paid them their full salary the week before when they only worked 35 hours, but in the following week when they worked 42, I had to just pay them the overtime for those 2 hours. So thank you for that distinction. And going back to what you said earlier, the safest bet is to pay all of your people um, as an employee,
Mhm.
processing through payroll, making sure the taxes are all taken care of,
Yep.
and paying them hourly. That's the safest bet,
Yep.
to just keep yourself out of any risky business.
Right.
But I think the biggest takeaway here is that there are very specific rules, and saying I don't know or I couldn't afford it or whatever, fill in the blank, it's just not like the IRS and the Department of Labor. They don't care. And unfortunately, not to be the bearer of bad news, although that seems to be my day today, unfortunately, um, the penalties are very stiff, like
Yeah.
very stiff for misclassification. So,
Yeah.
and as I say, even if employees agree to this, it's all fine when we're all friendly and on good terms. But if that working relationship changes and you get reported, it's not
Yes.
great.
And one last thing on this employee versus contractor situation. One of the things that could cause a person or a company to be audited is if a person who is a contractor files for unemployment. That's going
Mm,
to be a flag. Because
mm,
maybe in their mind, they don't know the difference between employee and
oh
contractor.
boy.
And they think, okay, well, they cut me from working for them as a contractor. Let me go file unemployment.
Hmm.
That could trigger an audit.
Yikes. I mean, that makes sense because the IRS is like, well, if this person thought they might have been entitled to
Right.
unemployment, or the state or whoever is championing that audit. Good to
Yes.
know. Let's go into another area that is not unique to nonprofits, nor is the other one, by the way,
Mhm.
but this inconsistency in policies. This is this is challenging for any business,
It is.
but back when I was helping lead a nonprofit, I think this is especially challenging in the nonprofit space. We're in the business of people. We care about our people. We
Mhm.
want to be really flexible and understanding. And what I've experienced is what that equates to sometimes is that we make exceptions to our policies, or we want to make exceptions to our policies.
Mhm.
How does this show up in your work, Tiffany, or what you've seen,
Yeah.
or where can nonprofits land themselves in hot water with being inconsistent?
So it is tricky and it because we want to ensure that our people are taken good care of, right? And everybody doesn't have the same need. So that is
Mm,
how it becomes, kind of really confusing.
mhm,
I would say we want to be as consistent as possible as it relates to our policies. Where we need
mhm,
to be mindful is, am I treating my African American females over 40 differently than I'm
mhm,
treating my Asian male employees who are 35 and below?
mhm.
Like,
Right.
am I being consistent as it relates to the way that I implement the policies or apply the policies
Mhm,
across demographics, right?
mhm.
That's the big picture and the place that we want to start.
Yeah.
When it becomes a little more difficult is when it becomes an issue of discipline,
Mhm,
disciplinary action. If someone is not performing the way that they should, in those instances, I say remain consistent,
mhm.
because it's harder to prove why you didn't apply the same remedy uh, for one person to another when they did the exact same thing.
Right. Right.
That's harder to prove. Now, maybe Susie, is more willing to learn and is, has the desire to get better, but just needs a little more support. And Johnny is just obstinate and doesn't want to
Mhm.
grow, but you
Right.
still need to apply the same level of discipline or remedy, if you will.
Sure.
You can provide the same level of support, but I would keep great detailed notes about each situation, because maybe one gets terminated before the other.
Something I learned from you, Tiffany, about this, for those leaders of organizations that are larger that have diversity, by departments, or you have multiple roles that are in middle management, maybe they're essentially leading the same thing. We have to be very careful that those that are supervising our frontline team or teams, that those leaders are handling things consistently, right? So I think this is something I learned from you. Just because you have, as a company, so I have two middle managers, say, that are running two different teams, and one manager decides they're going to handle this disciplinary action or make exceptions to the policy or whatever, handle it this way for their employees. Maybe they would treat all of their employees the same
Yeah.
way, right? Except this manager over here handles it differently. And
Mhm.
that has a different approach. Team A and Team B handle it completely differently. That is still an issue, you've
It
taught
is.
me. And it's like, it's not a down to your direct supervisor, it's at an enterprise level. Is your company treating people consistently? And so you have to ask yourself as a leader of the business, because when you taught me that, I'm like, oh my Lord, like we need to make it very clear to our middle managers where they have discretion and where that needs to rise to an executive leadership level. Because the reality is all of our middle management does not necessarily know what's happening behind closed doors with other team members, right? So when they're asking for exceptions to policies, or we have unique issues with how we might need to approach a performance or a discipline issue, like making sure that you as an executive leader are in the know with that, because that creates pretty significant risk that I didn't really consider. Because we're all individuals, and my supervisors are individual people, and the relationships are individual. But to your point, Tiffany, how you deal with performance needs to be consistent across the board.
Yeah.
For example, if you have like a remote work agreement, which is in my case, if one manager likes to have all of their team in the office and the other manager's like, I don't really care, could the employees feel that there is inequity or whatever? And I didn't really realize that when I thought about policy administration. I think people think about, well, if someone's going to accuse you of wrongful acts by way of supervising them, then it's kind of a direct relationship with you and the supervisor.
Mhm.
But I've learned that's not really the case. Is that
Right,
fair?
because if there's a lawsuit, they can sue the individual supervisor, but they're going after the company.
Of course. Yeah.
So
Right.
they want to know what the
Exactly.
policy is, and they want to know if you followed the policy.
Right.
And if they're
Even if I didn't
fighting,
even know. I didn't even know what was happening, maybe. I mean, that's
Exactly.
not really the case. I'm kind of a control freak, know everything, but I could see where organizations could get themselves into hot water by the executive leader just doesn't know. And so how within your organization can, you really create that feedback loop so that when there are these situations where you need to, I don't want to use the word referee, but just make sure that there's some level of consistency across the teams. And what we did, we actually had Tiffany come in, is like, all right, let's just do a little classroom training on the things that you get discretion on or autonomy on, versus these are the things you really need to raise to senior leadership just to make sure there's equity across the team, and all people are kind of addressed, or treated in the same
Mhm.
way. So that was definitely a lesson learned for me this last year.
Yes.
Thankfully, in a proactive way. It wasn't, in a proactive way, like, oh, I didn't even know that. Come tell my team this. I want to talk about something else that I see in my experience when I work for the nonprofits. I see it all the time. It's probably, if I had to choose one thing, that's probably my biggest, I don't know if I want to use the word frustration, but within the nonprofit sector, especially, hate to call us out here, but this issue about being overly generous with people, not holding them accountable, or being rigid. We can't have any flexibility because we're so afraid of being sued, or
Yeah.
we're so afraid of dealing with the people problems that we tend to do nothing because we just aren't informed, educated, or just operate in a space of fear.
Yes.
So talk to us about that.
Yeah, that is so common. I've seen clients on both ends of the spectrum, and this is not me giving myself a plug or HR Tailor Made a plug, but this is truly one of those instances where it's helpful to have an HR partner.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have an HR partner, that person can really help you balance
Mm-hmm.
um, for that area that is not natural for you. So maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
not natural for you to come down on people, and I'm using terms that my clients have said to me. I don't want to come
Mm-hmm.
down on people. You're not. There are
Mm-hmm.
expectations that you have to set
Mm-hmm.
for people that are on your team, and you have to hold people accountable. And it's because the board is going to hold you accountable. So when we
Yeah.
are overly generous, one of the questions I tend to ask my clients is, are you choosing you, yourself, or are you choosing that employee?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you choosing today?
Right.
Because
Right.
you're going to keep on giving space to a person who is not performing or is showing up in a way that is not representative of your organization. You're choosing that person over yourself and the organization because the board is
Right.
going to address you and the
Mm-hmm.
organization suffers. On the flip
Right.
side, when we're too rigid, an HR person can also help pull them back to the middle and
Mm-hmm.
remind them that this is not prison. We
Mm-hmm.
want to create
These
a
are
space
people.
for these people that want
Mm-hmm.
to have a place that they enjoy. Who doesn't?
Right.
So
Right.
when we're too rigid, we are preventing the oxygen to flow that allows people to feel free to really do work that they feel good about in a
Mm-hmm.
space and for an organization that they feel good about.
Yeah. I I've worked with organizations that there's kind of this internal culture. There's basically nothing you can do to like get on a PIP or get terminated, right? And I don't know if anyone out there is listening, but I have seen in reality and practice when I have worked for organizations, and at the time I was in charge of HR in addition to my many other responsibilities. And obviously now my own business, that if you have your HR processes tight and very clear expectations for your team, you have a very consistent. Remember, we talked about consistency and discipline. You've made it abundantly clear to your employees and your, direct supervisors what the process is for that disciplinary action. If you actually follow that process, I wholeheartedly believe that you can get to a comfortable place when you have to make a decision to part ways. There is not this entrapment mindset we have to continue operating that, we just don't ever want to get sued. So we're just never going to deal with the issues, because that breeds so much bad morale and toxicity for the existing team members when they see an environment where just nobody is held accountable or dealt with, right? And so for anybody that's feeling that entrapped space, there is a world, I promise I live in it, where every single good intention and I'm fighting for you to be successful, but at the end of the day, this is what this company needs to be successful. And we're going to do everything we can to get you there. But if not, like, I feel comfortable when I do have to make those really hard decisions. I don't ever depart thinking, oh, I'm just going to hear from a lawyer. And even if it was not, it's not always, rainbows and unicorns when people leave your organization, but you can feel a great sense of peace of knowing that you have your I's dotted and T's crossed, that if anyone wanted to accuse you of any sort of wrongful acts, that you could defend yourself or the organization. There is a world where that exists, Tiffany. I mean, that's a lot of what you do, of course.
Yes.
I'm sure you can echo everything I'm saying. There is a world where you can sleep
Yes.
well at night and still deal with team members that are just maybe not a right fit, or, it's just time for them to move on. There is a world.
Yes. And one thing, as we leave this particular topic, I'll remind people of is being honest is being kind. When we're not honest with our team members, that is mean, honestly, because
Yeah.
you're literally setting them up to fail, and you're allowing them to, if you terminate them, leave your organization thinking that they're amazing and going into another organization doing the same things and not performing and not being able to be their best because they think that the foolishness that they have done in your organization is good, and it's not.
I love when you use that word foolishness, because there's a lot of foolishness in the people business, that's for sure.
It is.
Speaking of, investing in people, coaching in people, and I know that budgets are limited and capacity is limited or what have you. But organizations, I think, really struggle to be able to invest in their people, whether it's around coaching, personal development, benefits, and things like that. Where have you seen your nonprofit clients be able to support their employees in this way, and bonus points if they are cost effective or, affordable? What are some like practical tips or the consequences of not making that a priority?
Well, a couple things. I don't know that any of it is cost effective, to be honest with you.
Right.
I'd be making it up if I said it was, but it's not. Obviously, that depends on your budget. But
Right.
one of the things that clients say to me is they want to make sure that their team members are well taken care of, which is why they work with us, because they know that the team will have a person to come to if they have a complaint and they want to keep it confidential, or if they need support with their benefits and they have questions about all of that, or if the leaders need support navigating difficult situations.
Yeah.
They come to us for all those things. So that's one of the ways that they come to us, and one of the reasons that they come to us is because they want to make sure their team is well taken care of. The other thing is not enough nonprofits do this, but I've seen where nonprofits and small businesses, the leader, the executive director and or owner has a coach, and the organization is paying for it. So a lot of executive directors are new to the role.
Right. Yeah.
So they need a coach. That is
Yeah.
money well spent. They need a coach. The other thing, I know they're not employees, but board members are pivotal to the success of a nonprofit organization.
Hmm.
The board needs ongoing training and they need to pay for it.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
another way that they're actually supporting the people that work in their organization is if
Hmm.
they're functioning at a high level. So that is an investment that they should make as well.
Yeah.
Professional development, I mean, you want your people to continue to grow.
Right.
So if there are free webinars, there are tons of free webinars out there
There.
now.
Yeah.
Find them, let them find them, let them come to
Right.
you and say, hey, I want to attend this. You could also, on an annual basis, say, we're going to allot $250 per person every year to take a course of their choice.
Right.
That's better than nothing. Even if it's
Hmm.
$50,
Right.
something is
Yeah.
really good.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, continuing to invest in people. And, one of the things that we've done, which is shocking for basically anyone that ever meets us, going back to kind of coaching and think about, how your supervisors, regardless of whatever level they're in, has intentional time out. We do it on a monthly basis. Tiffany, you know this. It's kind of like, you do what? Every single month, we have a one-on-one and we go through kind of our formal evaluation. It's about as formal as we get around here, but a formal conversation and creating coaching opportunities in the moment for things that are going well, things they can be working on, reevaluating goals, where are they at. So we have a high degree of accountability, but it's creating a safe space and a pause for us to have conversations between supervisors and their direct reports on, how they can invest in their own personal and professional development, get coaching on their specific work, and that, I mean, other than time, that doesn't cost us anything, but it's just invaluable, the information we're able to collect. And I think keeps morale and staff engagement really high as well. So if you're doing just the once, a year, if you're lucky, if you got everything going, which I've seen so many organizations do that, if you're only having formal sit downs with your team once a year, I mean, that could be an opportunity right away to just bake in some more coaching or mentoring between supervisors and direct reports, if that makes sense. Before we move on, though, I'm speaking from my own, experiences in the past, where I think HR tends to, be the forgotten child of all administrative functions, at least in my experience.
Yes.
Because I've seen so many nonprofits, and I used to have a role like this where I was hired for my accounting skills, but I was also assigned IT, HR, facilities, all things I have zero business actually managing. And that's just the reality for so many organizations. And I find that where I have personally seen organizations get in hot water, including wrongful termination lawsuits and things like that nature, is because they're having their accountants like do their HR, well, they're details people, and they're
Right.
like policy police or something like this. Maybe
Mhm.
our personalities are a little more conducive to the HR work, but HR is a completely different skill, like completely different background. There's completely different regulations, and they don't teach them in the same class.
Right.
And where I've seen nonprofit organizations get into some hot water is just this dispersing of HR responsibilities across either some combination of like administrative support or having someone that has no background in HR charged with that process. And I think we're discounting that it's what an administrative paper shuffling,
Yes.
file organizing. I don't know what people think it is, but it's not that. And I'm curious to hear from you, Tiffany. Where have you seen organizations fall short when they disperse HR and
Yeah.
not really centralize it in one place, and certainly not hiring the people that have that background?
Exactly. Well, what I've seen is a lot of mistakes, a lot of holes in processes. And there's oftentimes a lot of confusion
Mm,
because the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, or Sam said that the policy really means this when Amanda wrote the policy and she meant
mm,
this when she wrote the policy. So there's no consistency. And
right.
without having one person in charge of all the pieces of human resources, benefits, performance management, the file maintenance, making sure that employees are engaged, job
Mm,
descriptions, job
hmm.
postings, recruiting, all of those
Hmm.
pieces. When you don't have one person overseeing all of those, there's no consistency that runs through
Right.
each of those different functions, and they all work together and they
Mm-hmm.
all support each other. So it's really important that you have some consistency in your HR functions and practices, and obviously your policies as well.
Mm-hmm. I've got one more shameless plug for HR, a lesson learned that I've had before we wrap up. I think that a lot of professions have this where there's this understanding that if you come with this background, you are excelling in all of the things related to this background. I get this for the accounting side. Oh, if you're an accountant, you should be able to like be really high level, creative, solve all the world problems, and you should be really comfortable with the day to day bookkeeping details, et cetera, et cetera. I, in my experience too, I've witnessed this with HR that you are going to have some HR folks that are very strategy, creative, high level problem solving, those sort of things. And those may or may not be the same personalities that really thrive in, like you were talking about, consistency, details, et cetera. And I know some organizations, myself included, really benefit from trying to get the diversity and skill set that you really need. So having somebody that is very rigid with process, very detailed, making sure that every check and, I dotted T cross check mark checked. And then also working with a partner that when you do have those high level strategies, like we need to rethink about this employee handbook. I know, Tiffany, we've had conversations. How do we continue to move the needle on being a progressive workplace with our policies? What's happening out in the world? What's changing with the laws and the regulations? Like leaning on somebody that continues to understand kind of the higher level strategy. So I just share that from my experience to not discount the differences in those personalities and what both people bring to that skill set.
That's very
So I
true.
know, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And with that, Tiffany, I know we're kind of running out of time, but I'm sure people are maybe encouraged, maybe terrified. I don't know after this conversation, but if they are terrified and they thought, this is not something I can keep ignoring, I would love to get some guidance. And if people are interested in reaching out to you, what's the best way to find you?
Yeah, going to our website is the best way to find us. It's hrtailormade.com.
Okay. Okay.
HRTAILORMADE.com. Yep.
Awesome. So I will put that in the show notes, making a note of that. All right, Tiffany, this has been awesome. I knew it would be, and hopefully a lot of good information that the leaders can find. So thank you again for coming on and having this conversation. And for everybody listening, you know what to do. Shameless plug, engage with whatever you're listening to, whether it's YouTube, streaming on podcast, whatever, just engage with it, like it, review it. By doing that, it allows more nonprofit leaders like yourself to find this content that's so useful in running a modern nonprofit. So until next time, thanks.
That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Tosha Anderson with the Charity CFO, and this is a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to a Modern Nonprofit Podcast on all major streaming platforms so you will stay notified for when the latest episode drops, which will help you stay in the know about anything nonprofit related. Also, join our community on Facebook by searching for a Modern Nonprofit Podcast and follow us on all of our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.